Welcome to Hearthside Histories. I'm Doug. This is
I'm
AnneMarie.
AnneMarie.
This session number 3 is about royal champions. If you've ever wondered who are these individuals holding weapons in the presence, they're probably royal champions. So we're just going to start in with the explanations of what champions are and the history of them, and then we're going to take some questions. There's an ostensible reason we have champions, and that is sort of explained in the oaths, the oath that they give, and the response that their majesties usually give. When someone is invited into court to be made a champion, the king and queen say, "We are pleased by your valor, your skill, your chivalrous demeanor on and off the field," and this is for the armored champion. The other language is derived from this one, so it's very similar. We would ask you to continue to be an example of those ideals we hold dear. Would you be our champion? And one presumes that you've arranged this already, and the person says yes. And their oath then is, "Here do I swear that if any person of any degree, however high or low, shall deny or gainsay their majesties to be king and queen by right of arms, I stand as their champion, ready to defend their right in these lands in combat," or some other language depending on the discipline, "with any who would deny it." So their ostensible reason for existing is to defend the king and queen's right to sit the throne and reign over the kingdom.
Any questions about that?
So now we can kind of get into their actual roles. I think that at least in my experience, and I have been a King's Champion myself, we take on the role of bodyguards for their majesties. We are there to actually physically guard their person. And that's a play role. The crown is not in imminent danger of assassination all the time. So we don't really need a cadre of bodyguards. But it's part of the game that we're playing, and that sometimes is put on whoever is champion.
And having those extra people there also just makes the presence more interesting and more alive and more showy,
right.
More majestic.
More retinue is good sometimes. It helps establish the royal nature of the people who are sitting the thrones. But you don't really want to pull the sword and go after somebody if you think they're a threat. I have a little anecdote of when I was Talamar's champion at Pennsic 16. You're standing there and you're holding the sword, and court's going on his court went on for 3 hours that year, and I'm standing out in front instead of often the champions are standing behind and to one side. In this case, we had a large enough dais, and both myself and the Queen's champion were standing out front. And from the back of the hall, a large group, I'd say a couple of dozen two chucks, came into court unannounced and started walking towards the dais in a group. I stepped to the top of the stairs of the dais, and I pulled Oathbinder halfway out of the scabbard, and I barred their passage. Talamar wisely, generously, came up and tapped me on the shoulder and told me to stand down. He was going to talk to them. So very rarely does a champion get the opportunity to actually stop somebody because they look like a threat. So it used to be that you would see the guards that are sometimes out front who are not technically champions. They usually are selected on the day. Just, "Hey, would you mind being a guard for court this evening?" In past years, before it was widely established that you didn't enter the presence with a weapon, those guards would actually stop somebody if they saw that they were carrying some piece of weaponry. Um, so, so, so they're not really technically bodyguards. Um, they are examples of prowess in their given discipline. So, like the kings and queens personal champions are for armored combat, and those were the first two ever champions. Um, I I would bet that the third champion was an archery champion. Um,
And now rapier?
no, we've had archery a lot longer than
Oh,
we've had rapier.
okay.
Um, and there has been for many years an ANS champion, Arts and Sciences champion. That person was usually the winner of Kingdom Pentathlon, ANS Pentathlon. Now we have a rapier champion, a thrown weapons champion, a bardic champion, a youth champion, an equestrian champion. We used to have a scouting champion when scouting was a thing at Penzic. The scout champion was someone who was picked for that because there was quite a good core of scouts back in those days. Usually beyond the prowess in their given discipline, usually they are picked as good examples of just sort of well-rounded SCA people. Some prowess in their discipline, but they also comport themselves well. They dress in a period fashion as much as they can. Those sort of things go into usually selecting a champion. There have been times where their majesties have selected whole groups of people to represent them. A war band has been done. Occasionally, royalty have chosen a champion in each region for different disciplines.
I remember our first reign, we chose our rapier champion through a tournament.
Yes, we did. Rather than having individual personal champions for rapier, we had a kingdom rapier champion, the way the ANS had a kingdom ANS champion. So we had regional heats that led to a kingdom tournament to determine who the kingdom's champion would be. And that's been done for other things too. I think equestrian has done that from time to time.
We did that for bardic.
We did that for
one of
yeah,
our
in
reigns.
fact, yes, we did. We did that for bardic. We had people, it wasn't so much a tournament as we had people submit performances.
And they performed them in court, and we chose them and made them our champion that day.
Yep. So how are they selected? Beyond the tournament.
My first Queen's champion, I put out the call to anybody who wanted to not compete, but to put themselves out there for it, and held a tournament of sorts. They all fought, and when they won, they came and talked to me about the person that they fought against. So it was a tournament style. But then at the end of the day, I looked at how they comported themselves. There was no winner of a tournament. It was just how I felt about those people and who I wanted to stand as my champion for that day. Another time, I just picked somebody because I wanted that person to be recognized more in the kingdom for their particular prowess. I wanted them to be lifted up and seen. This year, the person I was going to select as my champion ended up being our current princess, so I couldn't pick her, and took some advice from a handful of people, and that's how I made my choice for my Queen's champion this time.
And that's generally how it is in the mid, that at least the armored champions are handpicked by the royalty. Someone who's impressed them or has been recommended to them, someone who deserves recognition. That's not the way it is in all kingdoms. A lot of kingdoms actually traditionally choose their champions by a tournament. And in some kingdoms, that tournament is very fiercely competitive and a very sought after position. Um, the first, I want to point out, however, that the first kings and queens champions in this kingdom, it wasn't just a, hey, you're doing good. We'd like to make sure that people know who you are and see you. Um, the first kings and queens champions, and for many, many years, were positions of trust and high honor, that the royalty were literally trusting someone with their personal honor, to defend that honor and to uphold their honor, to be honorable the way the crown wants them to be at all times. So it was kind of a big deal to be chosen as a champion, and that in some ways is why the Order of the Royal Vanguard was created, to recognize, and that is the award that is given to former kings and queens champions.
Your Majesty.
Recognize.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Your Majesty. Please continue.
So that to recognize that trust had been placed in that person, at least for a time. And it was done retroactively too, for anyone when it was created. Anyone who had ever been a king or queen's champion was inducted into that order. So how do we recognize them once they've been picked? How do we adorn them so that people know who they are and what they're doing, and it's okay for them to have a sword behind the king? Regalia for the king's champion, most notably, is the great sword of state, named Oathbinder, forged in ancient times by elven smiths. That is to say, Laurelin made it back in the day. It was ill-treated for all the right reasons. It was used as a stage prop. It got forgotten several times, got out in weather, had to be, it basically had lost its temper and was showing its age, and so it was reforged more recently, late 90s, I think, to with some new steel, pattern welded. It's really a magnificent weapon. It really is. Queen's champion?
Well, there are two spears. I don't know much of the history of those. I have had the use of both of those spears during my reigns. One is smaller, one is heftier. The heftier one is in use for this reign. The smaller one, while more delicate and more queenly looking, it's just hard to transport.
Yeah, the boar spear, partisan type one that we happen to be using now, breaks down in the middle and will pack smaller into a vehicle. The other one is a full length 6.5-foot spear, and you got to figure out how to get that in your car when you're traveling with it.
Now, didn't you say there used to be another one in the before times?
in the before times, back in ancient unrecorded history, there was a spear that was really just an old school flag staff topper that looked vaguely spear-like, and put on a stained pine shaft that however, did have I think it was the names of all the queens carved into it in a spiral. So it was the shaft that really had meaning, and I think that a newer head was put on it for a while. I don't think those have gone back to the people for whom it was important. Talamar probably. What else? The ANS champion used to have, as we were saying earlier, was the winner of Kingdom Pentathlon, and there was a big dragon-shaped medallion collar thing that they got to wear for 6 months or a year or whatever it was. I don't. Do we still do pentathlon?
I have no idea.
Anyone put something in the
Chat.
chat to tell us that they've been to pentathlon? We certainly weren't made aware of it this rain, so.
So what about the archery champion? Isn't there a quiver and
There's
arrows?
There's currently a quiver and bolts for a crossbow that I think has fallen into disrepair and is no longer safe to even try and span it. There used to be a carved quiver that the champion would have, and the champion would carry their own bow. Back in olden times, the champion would just have their own bow if they were standing up in court, and they'd have a quiver that was carved and decorated with mid-realm symbology and had a few arrows in it. Some had some meaning, some were just there to fill up the scabbard. I don't remember what all they were. So, but ask around some of the older archers who might remember what some of those arrows meant. I think it was that every archer champion put one of their own arrows in it and passed it down. But I can imagine that being a pretty big quiver after a while.
What about rapier champion? I know we handed off a rapier sword and a smaller dagger to our current rapier champion.
Right. There's also a leather somewhere. There's a leather baldric, and there's a cape. We chose not to pass those on yet. I'm not sure what kind of repair they are.
I've got like a mechanic's toolbox.
Whoever that is, if you aren't speaking directly, could you please mute your
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
There are thrown weapons. There are 2 different axes for the thrown weapons champion that I have seen in the regalia. One's a little larger than the other. One has a little scabbard on it. Let's see. There's a bardic champion. There's a staff, a inlaid wooden staff, and a tabard or a sash. Excuse me, that goes with that.
But what did the youth champions get?
The only thing I'm aware of is a little shield that has a dragon and a baton on it. And the equestrian champion has a tabard. Most of these offices have a tabard or a sash of some kind, or as in the case of the kings and queens champions, because they get beat up so much, often a new one, the new champion will make one for themselves that suits their armor and their period and so on. It's something that they're used to wearing, like a surcoat or a jupon or something like that that fits their style and doesn't encumber their fighting. So that's a pretty good, thorough explanation of what the royal champions are and what they're for and how to recognize them. Are there any questions we can field, or is there something that you think we might have missed that we could address at this time?
Put your questions into the chat and Sir Gregoire will read them to us.
Your Majesties, I actually had a question. When I served as Queen's Champion, it was explained to me that the Champion's Oath was originally not a response to a charge from their Majesties, but a challenge spoken by the champion to the populace. Can you respond to that?
Well, the language is something of a challenge. It's I stand in the only text I've got in front of me here is for the King's Champions. That here do I swear that if any person, right, that I stand as his champion, ready to defend his right in combat with any who would deny it. So that language is kind of challenging. If you would deny this, the truth of this, I will meet you on a field, I think is the implication there. I don't ever recall, even back in my day, I don't recall the oath was given to the king. I didn't stand up and challenge the crowd. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I believe it was Duke Eliyahu that told me that he challenged the crowd when he was made Queen's champion.
Oh, well, that's Duke Eliyahu, and he may have taken some theatrical liberties with the actual ceremony.
Okay.
We know him well. There's that is even in the coronation ceremony, the several times that I've come in as runner-up and had to testify to the identity of the Tanist, that was a challenge that I made to the crowd too. So it's yes, that is this is the person. Yes, I in the case of the champions, I am here right now to say that if you deny that this king or this queen have a right to sit the throne, I will defend that right. So I can see how Eliyahu would have taken that and reinterpreted it to be a direct challenge to the audience, because that language is there, but it's not, as I recall, it has ever been part of the actual ceremony.
Okay, thank you.
Did any questions come in through the chat?
There have not been any questions through the chat. There was a anecdote of a court guard. Gilchrist served as a court guard and stopped a lady who had up to 9 knives on her person from entering the presence.
We talked about that a little bit in the court etiquette session that we did. How that used to be kind of a little shtick thing, especially when the Great Dark Horde was a little more active in the kingdom, and if one of them were called up into court, there was usually a presentation of all of the weapons they were wearing in their hair and in their boot and behind their back, and laying them all out so that they could enter into court. And so, yeah, that was a thing, and I'm gratified in some ways that Gilchrist, in as recently as his tenure as champion, got to witness some of that. I think that's something we sort of miss in our current ceremony, is that it's so well understood that people sort of hurriedly get rid of their stuff before they get out of their chair even. And it used to be a ceremonial part of going into court was to take off a weapon, set it down, and enter court, and then retrieve it as you went back.
His Grace Edmund asks if the equestrian champion's lance is still in existence.
You know, in preparation for this session, I reviewed the
current inventory.
The inventory of weapons in the regalia, and I did not see a lance. I remember it broke down, and I think it was in like 3 pieces so that it could be transported. It was quite tall, quite long, but I don't remember seeing it in the current inventory. I certainly haven't seen it in a while, so I'm not sure what's happened to that. If anything, it may have never gotten a picture taken of it, and it's in a trailer or a storage shed somewhere, and people don't really know what it is, but it may still be extant, but it's not currently in the inventory.
Gilchrist clarified that he was a presence guard, not a champion.
Ah, well, still,
Yeah.
that's usually where that business is done, is by the guards, not by the champions. So,
Another question for your majesties from me. Oftentimes it seems that the champions' roles are defined or limited to court and possibly actions at Penzik for champions battles or negotiated champions fights to signal lay on. What is your opinion of champions taking initiative to do champion type things?
Well, I remember when you were my champion, you did your own challenge tournament. And I thought that was really neat that you did that.
yeah, didn't you actually sponsor your own tournament with a prize?
I did. I don't think there was a prize. I think that that was a long time ago now. I think that I had a dozen roses, and whoever challenged me, if they won, I would present the rose to their inspiration. And if I won, they presented the rose to Her Majesty.
We both have encouraged our champions, and I have always encouraged my champions to go out and hold a field at a tournament. Find, I will ask a marshal to hold space and time for our champions to go and take on all comers, take on all challenges in our names. So I'm a big advocate of that. Uh, the sort of bodyguard role comes to the fore at Penzik, where the king's champion wants to be right off the shoulder of the crown the whole battle, and that's cool. I mean, it's a kind of action you don't get unless you're the king's or queen's champion. So yeah, we encourage them to, because as I stated earlier, part of this is we think of them as good examples, and we want to let them be seen as that example, so that other people can see the example we are trying to set for them. So yeah, anything, and wear the colors, go hold the field, wear the tabard, you paint your shield, you know, take on the role. We're very much in favor of that.
Let's see, what are some other questions I can come up with? What is the worst thing that a champion could do while in royal service?
Oh,
Okay, allow me to rephrase that. Short of the obvious, like, complete meltdown that's going to get them escorted off of site or barred from the society, or otherwise completely socially unacceptable behavior, within the confines of not being a complete jackass, but you know, the small slips that would be considered ignorable for someone who wasn't wearing the champion's tabard, but as the champion, this is now magnified to the point that it's actually a problem.
well, I would certainly expect anyone who is acting as a champion to be courteous at all times, that speaking to someone rudely or taking advantage of their position, such as it is, I would not look very kindly on that. Someone who is using, how can I put this? Taking advantage of their current celebrity, the brief celebrity that comes with being a champion, somehow taking advantage of that, I think that would be untoward.
I agree.
That's not the worst thing, obviously, like you're saying. Her Majesty's champion is always looking for an excuse to stab somebody with that spear, and we have to be very careful not to give her any excuse.
I apologize. I might have instigated that.
Oh, I know you did.
I suggested cross-checking as a safer, less lethal option.
I see. Now I know where she gets it.
Are there any other questions for their majesties?
None? Well,
Chat is quiet.
well, I think it just goes to show the incredible preparation that we went to. The completely thorough and unambiguous. Oh, there we go.
Does Gilchrist ask, does entering a Champions Challenge tournament not imply a challenge to the crown?
It's an interesting philosophical question. But I think as we step out on a field of honor, we are there to honor our opponents as well as compete with them. So I think we can put this under the umbrella of someone holding the field in their Majesty's name. Someone steps out on the field to honor that name and give the person, show respect to the person who has made the challenge, the champion making the challenge. How's that?
So Gilchrist clarifies that he's actually been reluctant to fight mid-realm champions for that reason, but he has had a go at the Easts before.
Very good, very good. Also worthy, but again, it's if the champion is issuing the challenge, I can't see any dishonor in taking that challenge up. It is a test. You are testing, and having a champion put themselves out there for that test is honorable. If they occasionally fail in that test, it is just encourages them to strive harder. It doesn't overturn it doesn't prove that their majesties don't have a right to sit the throne. It says that their champion has not quite risen to the level that they should, and should redouble their efforts to improve. And honestly, if in defeat, showing a certain amount of grace and humility is also honorable. So they can reclaim their honor that way.
Okay, I have another doozy for you. As a member of the Order of Chivalry, I feel that I can ask this question and
Do you?
not get myself in as much trouble as I might if I were not a peer.
Roll the dice, sir.
Do you feel that as your champion, a person would have the responsibility and the right to potentially defend you from yourself? Were you in a situation where perhaps you hypothetically, not your majesties obviously, but a crown were too far into their cups or had lost their temper on the field, or something that would bring dishonor to the crown? Would it be the champion's position to step in and say, Your Majesty, perhaps we should step over here for a minute so you can inspect this strap that I think broke? As an example.
Give them an excuse to extricate themselves. Yes, absolutely. I think that would be a most appropriate thing, because again, you are entrusting your champion with your honor. And if part of defending that means that they need to take the king or queen by the shoulders and say, excuse me, Your Majesty, you need to think about this action before you take it. Would you agree?
I agree.
How would you recommend that a champion who was not a peer do that?
The same,
gracefully and with courtesy.
well,
Well, the way you described it was perfectly fine. Can we talk about this thing?
I have, in my role as a knight and a royal peer, have not being the champion necessarily, but in that role of being a guardian of the king and the crown, have said to royalty in the past, very quietly and to one side, Your Majesty, no honor will attach to this action. And that's usually all it takes. And I think that is a perfectly valid thing for a good servant of the crown to say to the crown. Your Majesty, I do not believe that any honor will attach to this action.
Excellent. All right. Any other questions for their majesties about royal champions?
We don't have to go the whole hour.
Well, I'm giving everyone one last chance
I
to
understand.
hop into the chat. I don't want you all coming up to me at TOC on Saturday saying, "Hey, I was too afraid to type it in the chat. Can you take me to their majesties to get this question answered?"
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, that looks like it then, your majesties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Gregoire, for stepping in for your lovely wife in this session.
You are most welcome.
Thanks everyone who showed up. How many did we get finally?
6, I believe.
Okay, well, a little down from the last one, but I don't remember what our next.
I think our next one is peerage orders.
Oh, that should be a good one. That'll go the whole hour, I bet. So everyone who's here, tune in for that one. We'll promote it again in a few weeks. Thanks for coming. Draco Invictus.
Draco Invictus. Thank you, your majesties.
Draco Invictus.